The dawn came to Phoenix like a judgment. Cole Bennett stood in his garage at 6:47 in the morning, gripping a wrench so hard that his knuckles had gone white. The rumble started low, distant thunder rolling across the Arizona desert. Then it grew into something that made the windows shake and set off car alarms 3 blocks away. One motorcycle, then 5, then 20, then so many he stopped counting. 95 Harley Davidsons to be exact. 95 members of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club, all converging on his failing garage like a leather-clad army answering a call to war. Cole had faced danger before. Afghanistan, firefights in Kandahar province, IEDs that turned vehicles into coffins and left survivors wondering why they'd been spared. But this was different. This wasn't enemy combatants. This was a brotherhood he'd challenged, a father he'd contradicted, a disabled girl he'd touched without explicit permission. The bikes circled his shop like wolves surrounding wounded prey. Chrome glinted in the early morning sun. Leather vests bore patches that told stories of loyalty and violence, and bonds that couldn't be broken. Leading them all was a man Cole had met 14 hours earlier, a man known only as Hawk. 6'3" of controlled fury, salt and pepper beard framing a face that revealed nothing behind dark aviator sunglasses. He dismounted his custom Harley with the deliberate movements of someone who'd made this walk before, someone who knew exactly what he was capable of. Cole watched through the cracked window as Hawk approached. The sea of bikers parted for their vice president. 94 men waiting to see what their brother would decide, waiting to see if the mechanic who gambled everything had delivered a miracle or signed his own death warrant. How did I get here? Cole thought, his heart hammering against his ribs. How did a broke mechanic with a bum leg and a dying business end up standing between 95 Hells Angels? And whatever judgment they came to deliver, the answer lay in a single moment of truth 14 hours earlier. A moment when he'd seen something everyone else had missed. A moment when he'd chosen compassion over fear. A moment when he'd bet everything on his ability to see what others couldn't. To understand what happened, you have to understand Cole Bennett. And to understand Cole, you have to understand that his garage wasn't just a business. It was the last thing standing between him and complete failure. Bennett Auto Repair sat on the forgotten edge of Phoenix, where the desert crept close and the rent was cheap because nobody wanted to be there. The building looked like it was held together by hope and duct tape, cracked concrete floors, peeling paint on walls that had once been white but had faded to the color of old bone. A rolling metal door that squeaked every time it opened, announcing customers Cole rarely had. But if you looked closer, if you really paid attention, you'd see something else. Cole's tools, worn as they were, sat in perfect order. Every wrench in its place, every socket organized by size. The workspace might have been humble, but it was immaculate. That was the contradiction of Cole Bennett. He was broke, but he wasn't broken. Not where it counted. He'd learned precision in the Army. 8 years as a vehicle mechanic with the 101st Airborne Division. Deployed twice to Afghanistan, where he'd kept Humvees and transport trucks running through sandstorms and combat conditions. His platoon used to joke that Cole could hear an engine problem before it happened, could feel a misalignment in his bones. Mechanics keep soldiers alive. That's what their sergeant had told them. Every bolt you tighten, every system you check, that's someone's kid coming home. Cole had taken that seriously. Maybe too seriously. His ex-wife Claire used to say he cared more about machines than people. Said he could spend 6 hours diagnosing a transmission, but couldn't spend 6 minutes talking about their marriage. She wasn't entirely wrong. Cole understood machines, they made sense, they followed rules. When something was broken, there was always a reason, always a solution. People were messier. People lied. People left. Machines just needed someone who would listen. That Thursday morning, the day before 95 bikers would surround his shop, Cole was doing what he did most mornings, barely surviving. Past due rent notices sat on his desk, their red stamps screaming final notice. His breakfast had been gas station coffee and whatever optimism he could scrape together. The limp from his left leg, courtesy of an IED outside Kandahar, made him move slower than he used to. But his hands were still steady. His mind was still sharp. He'd just finished replacing brake pads on Mrs. Thompson's Honda, charging her half what any other shop would because she was 76 and living on Social Security. She tried to pay full price, but Cole had waved her off. What was he going to do? Take food money from a grandmother? His bank account disagreed with his ethics. But Cole had learned a long time ago that you could be poor and still be decent. In fact, sometimes being poor was the only time being decent really counted. Above his workbench, pinned to the wall, was a single photograph. 5 soldiers in desert camouflage arms around each other, squinting against the Afghan sun. Cole was on the left, younger, both legs working, a smile that didn't carry the weight it did now. 3 of those men hadn't made it home. Cole had. And sometimes late at night when the garage was quiet and the desert wind howled through gaps in the walls, he wondered if he'd survive just to end up here. Broke, alone, fading away in a garage nobody noticed. But then he'd look at his tools, at the photo, at the sign outside that read Bennett Auto Repair. We fix what others can't. And he'd remember that surviving meant something, that expertise earned through suffering had value, that sometimes the smallest mechanical flaw could mean the difference between life and death. He'd learned that in the desert. He was about to remember it in ways he couldn't imagine. The rumble announced them before Cole saw anything. Not the convoy of 95, just one bike. But what a bike. The Harley that pulled up to Cole's garage was a custom build, the kind that cost more than most people's cars. Chrome so polished it looked liquid, engine tuned to perfection, paint job that probably took weeks. It rolled to a stop outside his open bay door, and for a moment Cole just stared. Then the rider dismounted and Cole's survival instincts started screaming. The man was massive, 6'3" at least, broad across the shoulders in a way that suggested he didn't just ride bikes, he could probably lift them. Salt and pepper beard, long hair pulled back, and a leather vest that displayed his allegiance in patches and symbols Cole recognized immediately. Hell's Angels. Vice President. The man's eyes were hidden behind aviator sunglasses, but Cole could feel the weight of his gaze anyway. There was something predatory in the way he moved. Not aggressive, controlled. Like a man who didn't need to prove he was dangerous because everyone already knew. The man stopped 10 feet from Cole's garage entrance, looked around at the humble shop with an expression Cole couldn't read, then spoke in a voice like gravel rolling down a mountain. You, Cole Bennett, heard you're the best transmission guy in Phoenix. It wasn't really a question. Behind the man, a custom van pulled into the parking lot. Black, expensive, the kind of vehicle that suggested serious money. The side door opened, and a wheelchair lift began to descend with a mechanical whir that cut through the desert morning. And that's when Cole saw her. Sloan was 16 years old, though her eyes carried the kind of weariness that aged her beyond her years. Bright hazel eyes that missed nothing. Long auburn hair pulled into a casual ponytail. She wore a faded band t-shirt and in jeans, the kind of outfit that screamed normal teenager. But there was nothing normal about the wheelchair she sat in. The device looked like something designed by aerospace engineers. Sleek titanium frame, complex joint systems, LED panels displaying diagnostics. It was the kind of equipment that cost more than Cole made in a year, maybe 2 years. The chair descended the lift smoothly, and Sloan maneuvered it toward the garage with practiced efficiency, though Cole noticed the slight grimace that crossed her face with each movement. My daughter, the man said, and suddenly his dangerous edge made perfect sense. This wasn't just a biker. This was a father. She needs work on her chair. Bearings been squeaking. Cole hesitated. His sign said he worked on cars and bikes. This was neither. I work on bikes and cars, not medical equipment. I wouldn't want to. The man stepped closer. Not threatening, just closer. You work on anything mechanical. Says so on your sign. Bennett Auto Repair. We fix what others can't. Cole's own words thrown back at him. He looked past the man to Sloan, who'd stopped her wheelchair just outside the garage bay. She was watching him with an expression that was half curiosity, half amusement. He's not going to hurt you, she said, and there was the ghost of a smile on her face. The man didn't react to her comment, but Cole saw the slight softening around his eyes. This terrifying man in the leather vest had a daughter who teased him, who wasn't afraid of him, who saw past the patches and the reputation as something else. Name's Hawk, the man said, and Cole understood it was both introduction and warning. This is Sloan. The chair cost $40,000, built by specialists in California, top of the line, but it's squeaking. And when I asked where to take it, 3 people mentioned your name, said you see things other mechanics miss. Cole felt the weight of expectations settle on his shoulders. This wasn't just a job. This was a test. He could feel it in the way Hawk watched him, the way Sloan waited to see what he'd say. He nodded slowly, wiping his hands on a rag that was more grease than cloth. "Bring her in. Let me take a look." Sloan rolled forward, navigating the slight lip at the garage entrance with a jarring bump that made her wince. Just a small reaction quickly hidden. But Cole saw it. He saw everything. Hawk followed his daughter inside his presence, filling the small space. Up close, Cole could see the details of his vest, the patches that told stories of chapters and rides in Brotherhood, the silver rings on his fingers, the tattoos creeping up his neck. This was a man who'd lived a life Cole could barely imagine. And right now, that man was trusting him with his daughter. Sloan positioned her chair near Cole's workbench in the good light where he usually diagnosed problems. She looked around the garage with genuine interest, her eyes lingering on the organized tools, the old military photo, the humble but clean workspace. "Nice shop," she said, and she sounded like she meant it. Cole knelt beside her wheelchair, his bad leg protesting the movement. But his attention was already focused on the equipment. And that's when his world shifted. Because what he saw in those first 30 seconds of observation would change everything. Cole's eyes moved over the wheelchair with the systematic precision he'd learned in the Army. Weight distribution first, joint articulation second, stress points third. It took him less than a minute to understand something that made his stomach tighten with recognition. This isn't a mobility device, he thought. This is a Puig. The wheelchair was beautiful, state-of-the-art, expensive beyond anything Cole had worked on before, and it was fundamentally, catastrophically wrong. Not broken. Wrong, there's a difference. Broken means something failed. Wrong means it was built to fail. The weight distribution was backward. The battery pack, the heaviest component, sat too far forward, putting 45 pounds of pressure on Sloane's lower back instead of distributing it through the frame. Her spine was being forced into an unnatural curve just to balance the chair's center of gravity. The wheel alignment was off by degrees so small most people wouldn't notice. But those degrees added up. Every time Sloane moved, her body had to compensate for wheels that wanted to pull slightly left. After hours of use, that compensation would turn into chronic shoulder pain, permanent muscle strain. The joystick sensitivity was set so low that Sloane had to push hard to get the chair to respond. Cole could see the calluses on her right hand where she gripped the control. A 16-year-old girl shouldn't have calluses from asking her wheelchair to move. And the brake system. God, the brake system. It engaged unevenly, left side catching a fraction of a second before the right, creating a jarring stop that would snap her neck forward every single time. Cole had seen this before. Not in a wheelchair, in a Humvee outside Kandahar. The suspension had been installed wrong. Microscopic misalignment that everyone else had signed off on. Cole had caught it during a routine check. Insisted they fix it despite the sergeant saying it was fine. 3 days later, that Humvee hit an IED. The proper suspension absorbed enough of the blast that all 4 soldiers walked away with their lives. If Cole hadn't caught that flaw, hadn't insisted on fixing what everyone else said was good enough, those men would have died. He was looking at the same kind of flaw now. Different machine. Same principle. This wheelchair was torturing Sloane in slow motion. Every single day. "How long you been using this chair?" Cole asked, his voice quiet. Sloane tilted her head, surprised by the question. Most people asked about the accident, about what happened to her, about whether she'd ever walk again. Nobody asked about the chair. 2 years, she said, since the accident. It hurt. Sloane went very still. When she spoke, her voice was smaller than before. "Yeah, my shoulders, my back. But they said it's the best money can buy. Top engineers, custom built. So I figured it's just me, my body adjusting." Cole looked up at her then, and something in his chest cracked. She'd been in pain for 2 years, and she thought it was her fault. Thought her body was failing to adjust to equipment that was supposed to help her. She'd been suffering, and she blamed herself because everyone told her the chair was perfect. "Money doesn't always mean right," Cole said softly. Behind him, Hawk's voice cut through the garage like a blade. "Something you want to say, mechanic." There was warning in those words. Danger. Cole could feel the temperature in the room drop. He was about to contradict $40,000 worth of expert engineering, about to tell a Hells Angels vice president that he'd been failed by the specialists he'd trusted with his daughter's life. Every survival instinct Cole had screamed at him to shut up, to fix the squeak, to take his money and send them on their way, to stay small and stay safe. But Sloan was looking at him now, and her eyes held something that cut through his fear. Hope. Desperate, fragile hope. That maybe, just maybe, someone finally saw what she'd been too afraid to say. That maybe she wasn't crazy. That maybe the pain wasn't her fault. Cole had learned in the desert that sometimes the smallest mechanical flaw could mean the difference between life and death. He'd learned that staying silent when you saw a problem didn't keep you safe. It just meant someone else would pay the price for your cowardice. He stood slowly, his leg complaining, wiped his hands on his rag. The next words out of his mouth would either save Sloan or destroy him. He chose Sloan. Cole took a breath, held it, released it slowly. Then he looked directly at Hawk and said the words that would change everything. I can fix the squeak, but if you want, I can fix the real problem. The silence that followed was the kind you could cut with a knife. Hawk didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, 6'3" of controlled danger, waiting. Finally, his jaw tightened. What problem? Cole kept his voice calm, respectful, technical, the same tone he'd used briefing officers in the Army when he'd found critical flaws in equipment. The chair's built wrong, weights backward, alignments off. Stress points are torture on her body. Whoever designed it focused on looking advanced, not on comfort or function. She's been in pain because the engineering is fundamentally flawed. Hawk's entire body went rigid. Cost me 40 grand. Specialist from California. Multiple engineers. Doctors signed off on it. And you're telling me they're all wrong. I'm not saying they're bad at their jobs, Cole said, and he meant it. I'm saying they don't listen to machines the way a mechanic does. They design what looks impressive. I'm looking at what works, and this doesn't work. Not for her. Sloan had gone completely still in her chair, her hands gripped tight on the armrests. Cole could see her barely breathing, waiting to see what would happen, waiting to see if her father would accept this or explode. Hawk took off his sunglasses slowly. His eyes were gray, hard as steel, and they pinned Cole in place like a butterfly on a board. You got some balls, mechanic. I'll give you that. You're either the best I've ever met, or you're running the stupidest con in history. I'm not conning anyone, Cole said. I'm telling you what I see. Your daughter's been suffering for 2 years because nobody wanted to admit the emperor had no clothes. Well, I'm not afraid to say it. The chair's wrong. I can fix it. Or you can take it somewhere else and she can hurt for another 2 years. Sloan leaned forward suddenly, her voice breaking the standoff. You really think you can make it better? Cole finally looked away from Hawk and focused on her. Just her. I know I can. The garage went silent again. Hawk studied Cole with the intensity of a man who'd spent his life reading people for lies, for weakness, for angles. Cole met his gaze and didn't flinch. He had nothing to hide. He was right. And somewhere in his bones, in his blood, in every instinct, honed by 8 years of keeping soldiers alive in a war zone, he knew it. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Hawk spoke. 24 hours. You rebuild that chair. You make it right. And if you're playing me, if you hurt my daughter, you'll answer to me and 94 of my brothers. He turned toward the door, gestured to Sloan. Leave the chair. We'll pick you up. Sloan unbuckled herself from the wheelchair. Cole moved quickly to help her transfer to a standard wheelchair Hawk pulled from the van. She was light, fragile in his arms for just a moment, and he could feel how much pain she'd been hiding. As Hawk wheeled her toward the van, Sloan looked back over her shoulder at Cole. Her eyes were wet, but she was smiling. Thank you, she whispered quiet enough that maybe only Cole heard. Thank you for seeing me. Then they were gone. The Harley rumbled to life. The van followed, and Cole stood alone in his garage looking at a $40,000 wheelchair he'd just promised to rebuild in 24 hours, knowing that if he was wrong, 95 Hells Angels would be coming for him at dawn. The garage door rolled shut with a metallic screech that echoed through the empty space. Cole stood alone now, the weight of his promise settling over him like a lead blanket. 24 hours. He had 24 hours to do what California specialists with advanced degrees and unlimited budgets had failed to do. The wheelchair sat on his workbench under the harsh fluorescent light, looking both impossibly complex and strangely simple at the same time. Cole rolled up his sleeves, pulled his toolbox close, and did what he always did when faced with a challenge that seemed too big. He broke it down into pieces. Assess, diagnose, rebuild. His military training kicked in like muscle memory. In Afghanistan, he'd worked on vehicles that had been pushed beyond their limits, machines that had to function perfectly or people died. This wasn't so different. This wheelchair had to function perfectly or Sloan would continue suffering, and Cole would face consequences he didn't want to think about. He started with complete disassembly. Every bolt, every joint, every electronic connection. He laid the components out on his workbench in systematic order, the way a surgeon might arrange instruments before a complex operation. Frame sections here, wheel assemblies there, control systems and wiring in their own designated space. The battery pack heavy and off balance when he set it on the scale. 47 pounds positioned exactly where it would cause maximum strain on Sloan's lower back. As Cole worked his mind catalog problems faster than his hands could move, the seat cushion wasn't just uncomfortable, it was dangerous. The foam compressed unevenly, creating pressure points that would cause sores after extended use. He'd seen similar issues with poorly designed body armor in the Army. Soldiers would come back from patrol with bruising and skin damage because the weight distribution was wrong. This was the same principle, just a different application. The battery placement wasn't just off-center, it was catastrophically positioned, 47 pounds sitting forward and left, creating a constant list that Sloan's body had to compensate for every single moment she was in the chair. No wonder her shoulders hurt. She was essentially doing a permanent isometric exercise just to sit straight. The footrests made Cole actually angry. They were mounted 2 inches too far forward, which meant Sloan's knees were forced into hyperextension for hours at a time. Chronic knee pain, potential long-term joint damage. And nobody had noticed because nobody had asked her to demonstrate how she actually sat in the chair for extended periods. They'd measured her once in a clinical setting, probably while she was fresh and alert. They hadn't measured her after 6 hours of use when fatigue set in and her body started compensating in ways that would cause permanent damage. 6 o'clock came and went. The sun set over the Arizona desert, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that Cole barely noticed. 18 hours left. He worked methodically, fighting the urge to rush. Rushing caused mistakes. Mistakes could hurt Sloan. He couldn't afford mistakes. Around 8 in the evening, while examining the seat assembly, Cole's fingers brushed against something that didn't belong. Paper, tucked deep inside the cushion where nobody would see it unless they completely disassembled the chair. He pulled it out carefully, unfolding what turned out to be a small piece of notebook paper. The edges worn soft from age and compression. The handwriting was young, feminine, careful. "Someone please help. It hurts." 4 words. 4. That was all. 4 words that Sloan had written and hidden where nobody would find them because she'd been told by experts that the chair was perfect. 4 words that said she'd been screaming silently for 2 years and nobody had heard her. Cole set the note down on his workbench next to the photo of his old Army unit. Mechanics keep people alive. That's what their sergeant had told them. Every bolt you tighten, every system you check, that's someone's kid coming home. Cole looked at the disassembled wheelchair, at Sloan's hidden plea for help, at his own worn hands that knew how to fix things nobody else could see. This isn't about proving I'm right, he thought. This is about saving this girl from 2 more years of suffering. Maybe more. Maybe forever. He picked up his wrench and got back to work. 11 o'clock hit Cole like a physical weight. He'd been working for nearly 5 hours straight, his bad leg throbbing from standing too long, his back screaming from hunching over the workbench. The garage was littered with wheelchair components, scattered tools, discarded designs he'd sketched and rejected. And suddenly, sitting on the cold concrete floor, surrounded by the evidence of his audacity, Cole felt the doubt creep in like poison through his veins. What if I'm wrong? The question arrived quietly at first, then grew louder with each passing second. What if I'm wrong? What if the California engineers were right and I'm just some broke mechanic with delusions of competence? What if I make it worse? What if Sloan gets hurt because I was too arrogant to admit I was in over my head. He could see his ex-wife's face as clearly as if she were standing in front of him. Claire, 3 years since the divorce, but her words still cut deep. They'd been fighting about something, he couldn't even remember what anymore. And she looked at him with exhausted frustration and said, "You always think you know better than everyone else, Cole. The doctors, the therapists, the marriage counselor, everyone. One day it's going to cost you everything." She'd been right in a way. His stubbornness, his inability to admit he might be wrong had contributed to the end of their marriage. He'd been so certain he could fix things, fix them, fix himself, if everyone would just listen to him. But he couldn't, and she'd left. And now here he was making the same mistake again, thinking he knew better than the experts, thinking he could see what trained engineers couldn't, thinking his instincts were more valuable than their degrees. Cole's phone sat on the workbench, Hawk's number programmed in from when they'd exchanged contact information. He picked it up, finger hovering over the dial button. He could call right now, apologize, say he'd been hasty, that he needed more time, that maybe they should get a second opinion from other specialists. Hawk would be angry, but Cole would survive. He could live with looking like a fool. What he couldn't live with was hurting Sloan. The phone felt heavy in his hand, the weight of potential failure crushing his chest. Then his eyes landed on the note. "Someone please help, it hurts." 4 words that Sloan had been too afraid or too conditioned to say out loud. 4 words that represented 2 years of suffering she blamed on herself because everyone told her the equipment was perfect. Cole set the phone down. He looked at the wheelchair frame, really looked at it, and something shifted in his perspective. He stopped seeing it as a medical device built by experts he was challenging. He started seeing it as a prison someone had built without meaning to. A cage constructed from good intentions and expensive materials and absolute certainty that they knew what was best. But they hadn't asked Sloan what she needed. They'd told her, and she'd suffered in silence because she thought the problem was her, not them. Cole had been wrong before. God knew he'd been wrong plenty of times. His marriage, his business decisions, his belief that he could make a life work outside the military structure that had given him purpose. But this he knew. Not because he had degrees or credentials or expensive equipment, because he'd spent 8 years keeping soldiers alive by seeing the things other people missed. Because he understood that machines were built by humans and humans made mistakes. Because he'd learned in the most brutal classroom imaginable that sometimes the smallest flaw could mean the difference between life and death. "I've been wrong before," Cole said out loud to the empty garage, his voice rough with exhaustion and conviction. "But I'm not wrong about this." The clock on the wall showed midnight, 6.5 hours left. Cole stood up, his leg complaining, his back protesting, his hands steady as stone. He had work to do. 1 in the morning arrived with the kind of clarity that comes from pushing past exhaustion into a second wind. Cole had his plan now, not just modifications, complete reconstruction. He'd spent the last hours sketching designs, calculating weight distributions, measuring tolerances. Now it was time to build. The first modification was weight redistribution, and it was radical. The titanium plating that made up the lower frame looked impressive, but it was 12 pounds of unnecessary metal. Beautiful, expensive, completely wrong for what Sloan needed. Cole carefully cut away the excess, his angle grinder throwing sparks across the garage floor like small fireworks. In its place, he used carbon fiber panels he'd salvaged from a motorcycle fairing months ago. A crashed sport bike, totaled by insurance. But the carbon fiber was still good. Strong, light, perfect. He worked slowly, precisely, bonding the carbon fiber to the frame with epoxy that would cure stronger than the original welds. Lighter means less strain. The van door opened with a hydraulic hiss, and Sloan appeared in the entrance. She was wearing the same band t-shirt from yesterday, her auburn hair pulled back in a ponytail, but her face carried an expression Cole had seen before in the Army, the look of someone who'd learned not to hope too much because hope hurt when it died. Cautious, guarded, desperately wanting to believe but terrified of disappointment. Hawk moved to help her, and for a moment the dangerous biker disappeared completely. This was just a father helping his daughter. his movements gentle and practiced from 2 years of routine. He lifted her carefully from the standard wheelchair they'd brought, and Cole noticed how light she was, how fragile, how much faith she was putting in a mechanic she barely knew. Sloan settled into the rebuilt wheelchair, and Cole held his breath. This was the moment. Either everything he'd promised would be true, or he'd just destroyed a 16-year-old girl's hope along with his own future. Sloane's eyes widened immediately. Her hands gripped the armrests, feeling their new position. Her feet settled onto the footrests that were now properly positioned. Her back straightened naturally instead of being forced into a curve. "It's lighter," she said, and her voice was filled with wonder. "It's so much lighter." She reached for the joystick, touched it with just her fingertips, barely any pressure at all. The wheelchair responded instantly, rolling forward smoothly. No lag, no strain, no having to push hard just to make the thing move. Sloane's face transformed, the guarded expression cracked, and underneath was pure, unbridled joy. She moved forward, testing the chair's response, then turned, then moved again. The 95 bikers watched in absolute silence as Sloane navigated the parking lot, and with each movement she grew more confident. The chair responded to her like it was an extension of her body instead of a prison she was trapped in. She rolled over a crack in the pavement, the kind that used to jar her spine, and the shock absorbers absorbed the impact so smoothly she barely felt it. Her posture naturally straightened because the weight distribution let her spine rest in its proper curve. Tears started forming in her eyes, but she was smiling, actually smiling in a way that suggested she'd forgotten what it felt like to move without pain. She did a full circle around the parking lot, then another, faster now, more confident, her movements fluid and natural. The bikers remained silent, watching this miracle unfold, and Cole could see some of them wiping at their own eyes. Hard men who'd seen violence and lived rough lives, moved to tears by a teenage girl remembering what freedom felt like. Sloane stopped the wheelchair directly in front of Cole. She looked up at him, and tears were streaming down her face, but she was laughing. A breathless, disbelieving sound that was part joy and part release of 2 years of suffering, finally acknowledged. "I forgot," she said, her voice breaking. "I forgot what it felt like to not hurt." Those words hit Cole harder than any punch ever could. For 2 years, Sloane had been in constant pain, and she'd forgotten that life could be different. She'd accepted suffering as her new normal because everyone told her the equipment was perfect and the problem must be her. But it wasn't her. It had never been her. Hawk had been watching his daughter with an expression that cycled through disbelief and something that might have been grief for all the pain she'd endured unnecessarily. His jaw was clenched tight, fighting to maintain control, fighting not to break down in front of his brothers. He removed his sunglasses completely now, not caring that his eyes were wet, not caring that everyone could see the emotion he usually kept locked down. He walked toward Cole slowly, and Cole tensed instinctively. This was still Hawk, still the vice president of the Hells Angels, still a man who could destroy Cole with a word to his brothers, still a father who just realized his daughter had been suffering when she didn't have to be. Hawk stopped inches from Cole. The garage, the parking lot, the entire world seemed to hold its breath. Then Hawk extended his hand. "You saw what million-dollar engineers missed," he said, and his voice was thick with emotion he wasn't trying to hide anymore. "You saw my daughter when they just saw a case study." Cole took his hand, and Hawk's grip was firm but not threatening. They shook. Two men from completely different worlds connected by a 16-year-old girl who'd suffered in silence until someone finally listened. The silence that had blanketed the parking lot shattered. Bikers started clapping, whistling, shouting approval. Some of them moved forward to examine the wheelchair more closely, asking Sloane how it felt, marveling at the modifications Cole had made. Others clapped Cole on the shoulder, nodded in their respect, accepted him in a way that transcended words. Sloane was still crying, still smiling, and she reached out to grab Cole's hand. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for seeing me." And Cole, exhausted and overwhelmed and barely able to process what had just happened, could only nod, because he understood now what he'd really done. He hadn't just fixed a wheelchair, he'd given Sloane her life back. And in doing so, he'd found something he'd been missing since leaving the Army. Purpose, community, a reason to matter. The celebration didn't last long. Hawk's hand was still on Cole's shoulder when his expression shifted from gratitude to something more serious, more purposeful. "We need to talk," he said, his voice dropping to a tone that suggested this wasn't a request. Inside. Cole's relief evaporated instantly, replaced by familiar tension. He nodded, following Hawk back into the garage. Sloan rolled in behind them, and three other bikers followed, their presence filling the small space with leather and gravity. The garage door rolled down, cutting off the sunlight and the celebrating brothers outside. Whatever was about to happen, Hawk wanted it private. Hawk stood in the center of the garage, arms crossed, and the dangerous edge Cole had seen that first day was back. Not threatening exactly, but absolutely serious. "You did something today that matters," Hawk began, his voice measured and controlled. "You fixed my daughter when nobody else could. When specialists with degrees and fancy equipment and all the money in the world failed, you succeeded. That means something." Cole waited, sensing the butt coming before Hawk said it. "But you also disrespected 40 grand worth of work from experts. You called out engineers, doctors, specialists. You made them look like fools. You made me look like a fool for trusting them." Cole tensed, his mind racing through possible responses, possible defenses. But Hawk wasn't finished. "So here's the deal." Hawk pulled a folded piece of paper from his vest pocket and set it on Cole's workbench with deliberate precision. "You're going to fix every broken wheelchair walker and mobility device in our community. For free." The words hit Cole like a physical blow. For free. Every device. His struggling garage could barely keep him fed. And now he was being told to work for nothing. Cole opened his mouth to protest, but Hawk held up one hand, silencing him. "Your community?" Cole managed to ask, his voice tight. Hawk unfolded the paper, revealing a handwritten list of names. Dozens of them. "There's 127 disabled veterans in Phoenix and the surrounding areas," Hawk said, and something in his voice softened slightly. "Brothers who served their country, got hurt, and came home to a system that doesn't give a damn about them. The VA gives them garbage equipment, cheapest bids, lowest quality. The system fails them every single day." He tapped the list with one thick finger. "These men and women sacrificed everything. Lost limbs, lost mobility, lost their futures. And their government thanks them with equipment that barely works and doctors who don't have time to listen." Hawk looked directly at Cole, and those gray eyes held something Cole recognized from his own mirror. Anger at injustice. Frustration at a system that failed the people it was supposed to protect. "You fixed Sloan, now you fix them." Cole stared at the list, his mind reeling. 127 people. 127 custom modifications. 127 lives he was being asked to change. "I can't afford to work for free," Cole said, and he hated how weak it sounded. "My garage is barely surviving. I have rent, utilities, I need to eat." "We'll supply materials," Hawk interrupted. "Tools, parts, whatever you need. You supply the skill, you supply the time." He stepped closer, and his voice dropped to something almost gentle. "We take care of our own, and as of right now, you're one of ours." Before Cole could respond, one of the bikers who'd followed them inside stepped forward. He was older, maybe 52, with gray streaking through his beard and scars visible on his arms. "I'm Dean," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Dean Patterson, lost both legs in Iraq, IED outside Baghdad, been in a chair 8 years. The wheels don't track straight. I compensate so much my shoulders are destroyed. Doctors say that's just how it is." Another biker moved forward, younger, maybe mid-30s, with a pronounced limp even standing still. "Carter Mills, blown hip, IED outside Mosul. They gave me a walker that's too short. Been killing my back for 6 years. Physical therapist says I need a custom fit, but insurance won't cover it. So I live with the pain." They kept coming forward, one by one, names and stories, injuries and inadequate equipment, Marines and Army and Air Force, men and women who'd served and sacrificed and been abandoned by the very system they defended. Each story was a weight added to Cole's shoulders, but it was a weight he recognized. These were his people, his brothers and sisters, in a way that transcended motorcycle clubs or social groups. They'd served, they'd sacrificed, they'd been failed. Cole looked at Sloane, who was watching him with an expression that said she knew exactly what he was feeling. She'd lived with inadequate equipment for 2 years. These veterans had lived with it for much longer. I don't know if I can help everyone, Cole said quietly. Honestly, some problems might be beyond what I can fix in a garage with salvage parts. Hawk nodded, respect in his eyes for Cole's honesty. Then you tell them the truth, but you try. That's all anyone can ask. You try and you don't give up, and you don't charge them money they don't have. He extended his hand again, and this time it felt like more than a handshake. It felt like an oath, a binding agreement between men who understood what honor meant. Cole took his hand, and as they shook, he felt something settle in his chest. Purpose, the thing he'd been missing since leaving the army, the thing his failing garage and his divorce and his isolated life had stripped away. He was being given a mission, a reason to matter. When do we start? Cole asked. Dean grinned through his scarred face. Brother, we start now. Day one began before the sun finished rising. Dean's wheelchair was first, and Cole approached it the same way he'd approached Sloane's. Systematic assessment, root cause analysis, understanding not just what was broken, but why. The tracking problem was actually elegant in its simplicity. The wheels were slightly different diameters, a manufacturing flaw so small nobody had caught it. But over 8 years, over thousands of miles, that tiny difference had forced Dean to constantly compensate, destroying his shoulders in the process. Cole rebuilt the wheel assemblies from scratch, matching them perfectly, adjusting the alignment until the chair tracked straight as an arrow. When Dean tested it rolling across the parking lot without having to correct his course, without his shoulders screaming in protest, he stopped in the middle of the lot and just sat there. His broad shoulders started shaking, and Cole realized he was crying. Dean rolled back to Cole and pulled something from around his neck. His dog tags, the ones he'd worn through 3 deployments. You earned these, brother, Dean said, pressing the worn metal into Cole's hand. More than I ever did. Day 2 brought Carter in his too-short walker. Cole adjusted the height, added cushioned grips that wouldn't cause blisters, and reinforced the frame so it could handle Carter's weight without wobbling. The modification took 3 hours. When Carter stood with the adjusted walker, his spine straightened for the first time in 6 years. The relief on his face was immediate, profound. His wife, who'd driven him to the garage, hugged Cole so hard he couldn't breathe. She couldn't stop thanking him, tears streaming down her face. And Cole stood there awkwardly accepting gratitude he didn't feel he deserved. He was just fixing what should have been fixed from the beginning. Day 3 changed everything. The bikers arrived with trucks full of equipment, new tools still in their packaging, materials Cole had only dreamed of affording, a professional pneumatic lift, welding equipment that didn't spark and sputter. They installed better lighting, transforming the dim garage into a proper workspace. And they stayed, learning, watching how Cole diagnosed problems, taking notes on his modifications. Hawk personally installed LED light strips while Sloane organized the new materials, creating a system that made sense. The garage was becoming something more than Cole's failing business. It was becoming a community hub. A gray-haired biker named Marcus Webb approached Cole while he was working. Everyone called him Wrench, 58 years old, hands scarred from decades of mechanical work. Used to be a mechanic myself, Wrench said, his voice gravelly but warm. Before my arthritis got bad. Watching you work, it's like watching myself 30 years ago. You got the touch, brother. Cole looked up from the wheelchair he was adjusting. The touch, the ability to listen to what the machine's telling you. Most mechanics, they force solutions. You let the machine show you what it needs. Wrench gestured around the garage. This here, what you're building, it's bigger than you know. You're not just fixing equipment, you're fixing hope. A younger biker named Ryan Cross joined them. Everyone called him Blaze because of his bright red beard. 32, former IT specialist who joined the club after 2 tours in Afghanistan. I've been documenting everything, Blaze said, holding up a tablet. Every modification, every technique. We can teach this, spread it to other chapters. Cole felt something shift. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was about creating a movement, a network of people who gave a damn when the system didn't. Day 4 brought unexpected attention. A local news van pulled up, cameras and a reporter Cole didn't recognize. Someone had tipped them off, probably one of the veterans Cole had helped. Cole was immediately uncomfortable, trying to wave them away. But Sloan intervened. She positioned herself between Cole and the camera and spoke with a confidence that belied her 16 years. "This man sees what nobody else sees," she told the reporter, her voice clear and strong. "The experts see specifications and regulations. Cole sees people, he sees suffering, and he can't look away. He doesn't fix machines, he fixes lives." The interview aired that night, and by morning Cole's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Day 5 brought more veterans than Cole could handle in a single day. Not just bikers now. Word had spread through VA clinics and veteran support groups and whispered conversations in physical therapy waiting rooms. "There's a mechanic in Phoenix who can help. There's a guy who actually listens. There's someone who gives a damn." Cole started working 16-hour days, barely stopping to eat, running on coffee and purpose. But he'd never looked more alive. The exhaustion was real, but so was the satisfaction. Every modification, every grateful face, every veteran who walked or rolled out of his garage with less pain than they'd arrived with. This was what "mechanics keep soldiers alive" actually meant. The wall that had once held only Cole's old Army photo now displayed something else. Photographs. Every veteran Cole had helped. Names written below each photo. Faces smiling in ways their families probably hadn't seen in years. Dean had taken on a coordinating role, his natural leadership coming through. He scheduled appointments, prioritized cases based on urgency, made sure Cole took breaks when he forgot to. Carter managed material sourcing, his contacts from years of trying to fix his own equipment proving invaluable. He knew which suppliers gave discounts for veteran causes, which companies donated unused stock. Wrench became Cole's second pair of hands, teaching other bikers basic repair skills, while Cole handled the complex rebuilds. Blaze managed documentation and outreach, his tech skills turning the operation from chaos into organized efficiency. And Sloan. Sloan became the heart of it all. She understood what the veterans were going through because she'd been through it. She spoke their language. She gave them hope just by existing. Proof that improvement was possible, that someone cared enough to try. Day 6 was different. The bikers threw a cookout in the garage parking lot, and everyone Cole had helped showed up. Dean and Carter and Sloan and a dozen others, plus their families. The parking lot was full of motorcycles and wheelchairs and walkers and laughter. Brotherhood patches were on display everywhere. But the atmosphere wasn't intimidating. It was a family reunion. People who had found each other through shared suffering and unexpected salvation. Cole stood to the side, watching the celebration, feeling simultaneously part of it and separate from it. Hawk approached with 2 beers, handed one to Cole, and stood beside him in comfortable silence for a moment. "You know what you are now?" Hawk finally asked. Cole shook his head, taking a long drink. "Essential," Hawk said, and there was no joke in his voice, no exaggeration. "You're our brother, and brothers protect each other always." The words settled over Cole like a blanket. Essential. He'd spent 3 years feeling useless, invisible, a failure. Now he was essential. Day 7 brought a moment Cole would remember for the rest of his life. He was under a wheelchair adjusting the suspension system when he heard Sloan's voice. "Cole." Something in her tone made him roll out from under the chair immediately. And there she was, standing, not in her wheelchair. Using a walker Cole had modified, yes, but standing, upright, moving independently, walking, 3 steps, 4, 5. Her face was a mixture of concentration and joy and disbelief. Cole dropped his tools, unable to process what he was seeing. Sloan had been in a wheelchair for 2 years, complete mobility loss from a spinal injury, and now she was walking. "The chair helped," Sloan said, stopping in front of him, slightly breathless. "Getting my spine properly aligned, reducing the constant pain. It gave my body space to heal. The doctors said it was impossible, but they were wrong." She smiled through tears. You gave me my life back, Cole. Now I'm going to help you save others. And she did. Sloan became Cole's assistant, his organizer, his advocate. She understood the veterans' frustration when equipment didn't work. She could calm the most anxious patient because she'd been where they were. She gave them hope just by walking into the room, living proof that the impossible could happen. Week 2 became week 3. Week 3 became a month. The garage had transformed completely. What had been a failing business was now a thriving operation. Not in terms of money. Cole still wasn't charging for his work, but in terms of purpose and impact. The local TV station did a follow-up feature. The Mechanic Who Heals, they called it, and the title stuck. Cole hated the attention, but Sloan reminded him that publicity meant more people getting help, more veterans learning they didn't have to suffer in silence. By the end of month 1, Cole had helped 37 veterans. By the end of month 2, that number had climbed to 75. Each modification was different. Each person had unique needs. But the principle was always the same. Listen to what the person needs, not what the theory says they should need. A veteran named Isaiah Stone came in during week 6. Everyone called him Hammer because of his size. 6'4", built like a linebacker. Intimidating to look at until you saw his eyes. He'd lost his right leg below the knee in Afghanistan. The prosthetic the VA had given him didn't fit properly. Created a gait that was destroying his hip and lower back. Cole spent 6 hours with him, not just adjusting the prosthetic, but completely rebuilding the attachment interface, creating custom padding, adjusting the angle based on Hammer's actual movement patterns instead of textbook biomechanics. When Hammer walked out of the garage that day, he moved without the pronounced limp he'd had for 4 years. His wife, waiting in the parking lot, burst into tears when she saw him. Hammer became another regular, showing up to help move equipment, to intimidate suppliers who tried to overcharge for materials, to stand quiet and massive beside Cole when difficult modifications required extra hands. The Brotherhood was expanding, not just bikers anymore, veterans from all branches, all backgrounds, all united by the simple fact that someone finally gave a damn about their suffering. Month 3 brought changes Cole hadn't anticipated. The sign went up on a Tuesday morning. Professional, printed, nothing fancy but legitimate. Bennett Mobility Solutions. Below that, in smaller letters, we fix what others can't. The garage was still humble, still the same cracked concrete and desert dust, but it was transformed, organized, purposeful, alive. Hawk handled scheduling now, his natural leadership translating perfectly to logistics. He ran the operation with military precision, making sure everyone got the help they needed in order of medical urgency. Dean coordinated outreach, connecting with VA hospitals and veteran organizations, spreading the word through networks that trusted word of mouth over official channels. Carter managed the supply chain, his connections growing daily. Companies started donating materials when they heard what Cole was doing. Wheelchair manufacturers sent prototypes for testing. Medical supply companies offered wholesale pricing. Wrench trained their bikers in basic repairs, creating a team that could handle simple adjustments, while Cole focused on complex rebuilds. Blaze handled everything digital: social media, scheduling software, documentation. He'd created a database of every modification Cole made, every technique, every solution, information that could be shared with other mechanics across the country. In Sloan was thriving. She walked with 4-arm crutches now, custom modified by Cole to fit her perfectly. She still used her wheelchair for long distances or when she was tired. But her mobility had improved beyond what any doctor had predicted was possible. She'd been accepted to Arizona State University's biomedical engineering program for the following fall. I want to design equipment that actually helps people, she told Cole. I want to be the engineer who listens. Hawk had softened in ways Cole never would have predicted that first day. The dangerous edge was still there when needed. But around the garage, around Sloan, around Cole, he was different. Calmer, happier. He brought coffee every morning, the good kind, from the place across town that Cole liked. They'd become genuine friends. 2 men from completely different worlds who'd found common ground in caring about people the system had abandoned. One morning while they were drinking coffee and watching Sloan organize the day's appointments, Hawk said something that stuck with Cole. For 2 years, I blamed myself for not being able to fix her. I spent $40,000 trying to buy a solution, hired the best people, used the best technology, and it didn't work. He paused, staring into his coffee cup. You showed me I was asking the wrong questions. I was asking how much does it kid and who has the best credentials. I should have been asking, does it work and does it help my daughter? The Brotherhood had expanded Cole's mission beyond Phoenix. Other Hells Angels chapters had heard about what was happening, and they were replicating the model. Bikers across Arizona, then Nevada, then California were finding mechanics they trusted and connecting them with disabled veterans who needed help. Weekly fix-it days had become standard at Bennett Mobility Solutions. Veterans would come in for adjustments, tune-ups, modifications. The bikers had learned basic repairs from Cole, and they'd help with simpler jobs while Cole handled the complex rebuilds. It was a community in the truest sense. People taking care of each other because institutions had failed them. Then Cole got a call that surprised him. A VA hospital administrator from Phoenix wanted a meeting. Cole almost declined, his distrust of bureaucracy running deep, but Sloan convinced him to take it. The administrator was surprisingly direct. Middle-aged woman with tired eyes and the look of someone who'd been fighting the system from inside. Your methods are saving the government millions in returned equipment and complaints, she told him. Veterans who work with you stop filing grievances, stop returning chairs, stop cycling through our system. We want to hire you as a consultant on equipment procurement. Cole's response was immediate. I don't want government money. I want you to listen to the people using the equipment. Actually listen, not just check boxes on forms. The administrator smiled. That's exactly why we need you. Cole took the consulting position. But on his terms, he'd review equipment specifications. He'd sit on procurement boards. But he wouldn't stop working in his garage, and he wouldn't start charging veterans for his help. The VA agreed. Some fights you win not by compromising, but by refusing to compromise on the things that matter most. By the end of month 3, Cole had helped 125 veterans. The wall of photos had expanded, taking up 2 full walls now. Names and faces, stories of suffering turned to relief, pain turned to mobility, hopelessness turned to possibility. Cole's old military photo was still there, but it didn't sit alone anymore. It was surrounded by proof that his service hadn't ended when he left the Army. It had just taken a different form. Saturday morning arrived with the golden light that made Arizona beautiful. Cole was at his workbench, working on a child's wheelchair. The boy was 8 years old, cerebral palsy, and his equipment was 4 years old and falling apart. His name was Daniel, and he sat patiently on a bench with his mother while Cole worked with the focused intensity that had become his trademark. Sloan was assisting, handing Cole tools before he asked for them. Their collaboration so practiced it looked choreographed. Hawk and Wrench watched from the side, learning, understanding that every modification Cole made could be replicated and taught and spread to help others. The work was quiet, almost sacred. This wasn't just mechanics. This was something more. Daniel's mother, Rebecca, sat nervously on another bench, her hands twisting together, her eyes never leaving her son. Sloan noticed and moved to sit beside her, understanding the fear because she'd lived it. I know you're scared, Sloan said gently, but Cole sees things others don't. He saw me when everyone else just saw a medical case. He'll see your son. The mother's eyes filled with tears. Insurance denied his new chair. They said the old one was adequate. But it's not. It hurts him. He never complains, but I can see it. And there's nothing I can do because I can't afford a new one and the system won't help. Her voice broke. I feel like I'm failing him every single day. Sloan took her hand, squeezed gently. Not anymore. Cole finished the modifications an hour later. The chair seat had been rebuilt with proper support. The wheels had been replaced with ones that actually rolled smoothly. The control system had been recalibrated for Daniel's specific motor control challenges. When Cole helped Daniel into the rebuilt chair, the boy's face lit up immediately. The chair responded to him perfectly, moving when he wanted, stopping when he wanted, giving him control he'd never had before. Daniel rolled to his mother, and his laugh was pure joy. The kind of sound that reminded everyone in the garage why they did this. His mother collapsed forward, hugging her son, crying so hard she couldn't speak. Cole stood awkwardly to the side, uncomfortable with gratitude he never felt he deserved. Just doing what needs doing, he murmured. After Daniel and his mother left, after the garage grew quiet again, Cole sat on his familiar stool. Sloan settled beside him. Hawk leaned against the workbench, and the three of them watched the sunset paint the sky through the open garage door. The comfortable silence of people who'd been through something profound together. "Do you ever think about that first day?" Sloan finally asked. "When you decided to tell my dad the truth?" Cole smiled slightly. "Every day. Still can't believe I didn't get killed." Hawk chuckled, a sound that 3 months ago Cole never would have believed he'd hear. "You know why you didn't?" he asked. Waited until Cole looked at him. "Because you saw my daughter as a person, not a problem. You saw her pain, and you couldn't look away. That's not mechanical skill. That's character." Cole shook his head. "I was just trying to fix what was broken." Sloan reached over and touched her chest, right over her heart. "You did. But it wasn't the wheelchair that was most broken. It was in here you fixed my hope." Cole looked around his garage, really looked at it. The walls of photos showing 125 lives changed. The tools organized on benches ready for the next person who needed help. The brothers working together in the background, cleaning up from the day's work preparing for tomorrow. This place that had been his failure was now his purpose. 3 months ago, Cole had been a broke mechanic facing eviction. Alone on. Forgotten. Convinced his best days were behind him. Now he was essential. Now he had family. Now he had brothers and sisters who depended on him, who trusted him, who believed in him. The system had failed them all, but they'd found each other anyway, built something better than what the institutions provided, created a community based on the simple principle that people who've suffered should help others who suffer, that those with skills should use them, that sometimes ordinary people have to step up when the system won't. Cole had learned in the desert that mechanics keep soldiers alive. Every bolt tightened, every system checked, every problem solved. He'd learned that lesson again here, in his humble garage, with equipment he'd salvaged, in skills he'd honed, in determination he'd found in the eyes of a 16-year-old girl who'd suffered in silence too long. The phone rang, Dean's number. "Got 3 more coming tomorrow," he said. 2 wheelchairs and a prosthetic. "Can you handle it?" Cole looked at Sloan, who nodded, at Hawk, who raised his coffee cup in salute, at the wall of faces, at the garage that had become so much more than a business. "Yeah," Cole said, "we can handle it." Because that's what they did now. That's who they were. A family built from broken pieces, a community forged in the fire of shared suffering and unexpected grace. And somewhere in the transformation from failure to purpose, Cole Bennett had found something he'd lost when he left the Army. He'd found his mission, his reason, his tribe. He'd found home. 6 months had passed since that dawn when 95 motorcycles surrounded Cole's garage. 6 months since Sloan had rolled across the parking lot, tears streaming down her face, rediscovering what it felt like to move without pain. 6 months since Cole Bennett had been given a mission that saved him from himself. The numbers told part of the story. 203 veterans helped, wheelchairs rebuilt, walkers adjusted, prosthetics refitted, mobility devices that had been prisons transformed into tools of freedom. But numbers couldn't capture what had really changed. Saturday morning arrived the way Arizona mornings do. All golden light and possibility. The kind of dawn that makes you believe anything can be fixed if you care enough to try. Cole was already at his workbench when the sun came up. He'd been working since 5, not because he had to, because he wanted to, because the work filled something in him that had been hollow for too long. The garage had expanded. The neighboring unit had become available, and the Brotherhood had secured it without Cole even knowing until Hawk handed him the keys. More workspace, more tools, room for 3 mechanics to work simultaneously. Wrench had his own station now, training younger veterans in basic repairs, teaching them that their service didn't end when they came home, that they could still keep their brothers alive just in a different way. Blaze ran the scheduling operation from a corner office that hadn't existed 3 months ago. Banks of monitors displaying appointments, supply chains, satellite locations in other cities where Cole's methods were being replicated. And Sloan was everywhere and nowhere, walking through the space on her forearm, crutches with the confidence of someone who'd conquered mountains, checking on patients, organizing materials, planning her first semester at ASU while still putting in 30 hours a week at the garage. The wall of photographs had become walls. Plural. 4 walls now, 203 faces smiling back at anyone who walked through the door. Proof that one person with skill and heart could change everything. But Cole wasn't thinking about numbers this morning. He was thinking about the 8-year-old boy sitting patiently on the bench. Daniel. Cerebral palsy. 4-year-old wheelchair that had become a torture device through years of growth and changing needs. Daniel's mother, Rebecca, sat beside her son, hands clasped so tight her knuckles had gone white. She'd been there since the garage opened at 6. Hadn't said much. Just watched Cole work with the desperate hope of someone who'd learned not to expect miracles, but couldn't stop praying for them anyway. Cole understood that look. He'd seen it in the mirror for 3 years after his discharge. The look of someone waiting for permission to hope again. He finished the last adjustment on Daniel's wheelchair, testing the joystick sensitivity for the 7th time, making sure it responded perfectly to Daniel's specific motor control patterns. "All right, buddy," Cole said, straightening up with a grunt. His bad leg always protested after hours of kneeling. "Let's see how this feels." Sloan helped Daniel transfer into the rebuilt chair. The boy's movements were uncoordinated but determined. He settled into the seat and his eyes widened immediately. "Soft," Daniel said. The word came out slurred but clear enough. "It's so soft." The rebuilt seat cushion was nothing like the hard foam the VA had provided. Memory foam layered with medical-grade gel, conforming to Daniel's body, distributing pressure evenly. No more sores, no more aching after an hour of use. Daniel's hand moved to the joystick, barely touched it, and the chair responded instantly. Smooth, controlled. No more fighting the equipment, just to move. He rolled forward slowly, testing, then faster, his face transforming from concentration to wonder. Mom, look, it listens to me." Rebecca stood up, one hand pressed to her mouth, tears already streaming down her face. Daniel circled the garage. His movements were uncoordinated, yes. The cerebral palsy couldn't be fixed. But the chair responded to him instead of fighting him, worked with his abilities instead of highlighting his limitations. He rolled to his mother and looked up with a smile that could break and mend hearts simultaneously. "Can we go to the park? Now I want to show my friends." Rebecca collapsed to her knees, hugging her son, sobbing into his shoulder. 8 years of watching him struggle, 8 years of fighting insurance companies and bureaucrats in a system that treated her son like a line item on a budget. And now, finally, someone had seen him, really seen him. Cole stood awkwardly to the side, uncomfortable with gratitude that felt too big for his garage, too big for him. Hawk appeared at his shoulder, watching the scene with the expression of a man who understood, who'd been exactly where Rebecca was 6 months ago. "Never gets old, does it?" Hawk said quietly. "Watching someone remember what hope feels like." Cole shook his head. "No, it doesn't." After Rebecca and Daniel left after their grateful words had faded and their taillights had disappeared down the street, the garage grew quiet. Sloan settled onto the stool beside Cole. Hawk leaned against the workbench. Wrench joined them, wiping his hands on a rag. Dean rolled up in his perfectly tracking wheelchair. Carter stood nearby, his properly fitted walker, forgotten because he didn't need it to stay upright anymore. The core group, the family that had formed in the crucible of shared mission. 6 months, Sloan said, staring at the walls of photos. 203 people. That's more than some nonprofits help in a year. "It's not enough," Cole said. "Not with sadness, with determination. There are thousands out there still suffering, still being failed by the system." "Can't help everyone," Wrench said, his gravelly voice carrying hard-won wisdom. "But we can help the ones in front of us, and teach others to do the same." Dean nodded. "We've got 12 other locations now. Phoenix, Tucson, Vegas, San Diego, all using your methods. All staffed by mechanics who give a damn. 16 chapters committed to the mission," Hawk added, That's 16 different cities where veterans can get real help instead of bureaucratic runaround. Blaze appeared from his office, tablet in hand, always connected to the network he'd built. Speaking of which, CBS wants to do a national piece. 60 Minutes. They want to feature the operation. Show how community can succeed where government fails. Cole immediately tensed. I don't do interviews. This isn't about you, Sloan said gently. It's about them. She gestured to the wall of faces, about showing the country that there's a different way, that we don't have to accept institutional failure as inevitable. Cole looked at the photos, 203 people, each one a story, each one a life changed because someone decided to give a damn. All right, he said finally, but only if Dean and Sloan do most of the talking. This is bigger than me. It should sound like it. The interview aired on a Sunday night 3 weeks later. Cole watched it from his small house, the place the Brotherhood had helped him buy. Still modest, still him, but home. The segment opened with footage of the garage. Veterans arriving, wheelchairs and walkers and prosthetics being adjusted, faces transforming from pain to relief. Then Dean's interview. Sitting in his perfectly tracking chair, his scarred arms visible, his voice steady and strong. The VA tried, I don't doubt that, but they're treating symptoms, not problems. They give you equipment that meets minimum specifications. Cole asked what you actually need. That difference. That's everything. Sloane's interview followed, standing now, walking with her forearm crutches through the garage that had given her life back. For 2 years, I thought I was the problem. The best engineers money could buy had designed my wheelchair. So when it hurt, I blamed myself. Cole taught me that expensive doesn't mean right, that credentials don't guarantee understanding, that sometimes you need someone who listens instead of someone who talks. Then Cole, uncomfortable on camera, but honest. I'm not special. I'm not smarter than the engineers who designed this equipment. I just listen differently. In the Army, they taught me that mechanics keep soldiers alive. Every bolt matters. Every adjustment matters. That's still true. These veterans served, they sacrificed, and now they're being failed by the system they defended. Someone has to fix that. Turns out I can. So I do. The segment closed with footage of Daniel, the 8-year-old with cerebral palsy, rolling through a park with his friends, laughing, playing, using equipment that worked with him instead of against him. The narrator's voice over the images. In a nation where bureaucracy often wins and people often lose, there's a garage in Phoenix where mechanics still keep soldiers alive. One adjustment at a time, one veteran at a time, one person who refused to accept that institutional failure was inevitable. Cole's phone exploded with calls and messages. By Monday morning, there were 17 veterans waiting in the parking lot when he arrived at 6. People who'd driven from New Mexico and Utah and California, who'd seen the segment and decided to take a chance, to hope one more time that maybe, just maybe, someone could help. The operation scaled up again. More mechanics trained. More locations opened. The Brotherhood expanded the mission with the same precision they brought to everything. Systematic, organized, relentless. Hawk coordinated it all. His leadership skills, finding new purpose. He was still vice president of the Hells Angels, still wore the patches, still commanded respect and sometimes fear. But now he was also the chief operating officer of a nationwide network of mechanics who fixed what the government couldn't, who cared when institutions didn't, who remembered that behind every specification sheet was a person in pain. By month 9, the number had climbed to 347 veterans helped. By month 10, it was 492. The VA called again, this time with a different request. We want to change our procurement protocols, the administrator said, the same tired-eyed woman who'd hired Cole as a consultant. Require end-user testing before we approve equipment. Mandate that veterans get input during the design phase. Actually listen to the people using this stuff. Will it happen? Cole asked. He'd learned to be skeptical of bureaucratic promises. I think so. You've proven the current system doesn't work. You've shown there's a better way, and you've made it impossible for us to ignore the problem anymore. Cole thought about that, about 203 faces becoming 492, about mechanics in 16 cities doing the same work, about a movement that had started with one 16-year-old girl suffering in silence. Good, he said. That's good. The one-year anniversary arrived on a Thursday, exactly 365 days since Sloan had appeared in her $40,000 torture device, since Cole had gambled everything on being right, since 95 bikers had surrounded his garage at dawn. The Brotherhood organized a ceremony, not a celebration exactly, a remembering, an honoring, a chance to mark what had been built from broken pieces. They held it in a park, the same park where Daniel now played with his friends, where Sloan had learned to walk again using Cole's modified crutches, where dozens of the veterans Cole had helped came to practice their new mobility, to remember what freedom felt like. 500 people showed up, veterans, families, bikers, mechanics from the satellite locations, VA administrators who'd fought to change the system from inside, news media documenting this impossible thing that had grown from one mechanic's refusal to stay silent. A stage had been set up, not fancy, simple, like everything about this movement. Hawk stood at the podium, his leather vest displayed proudly, his gray eyes scanning the crowd with the assessment of a man who'd learned to read people for survival. 1 year ago, he began, "My daughter was suffering. For 2 years, she'd been in pain, and I couldn't fix it. I'd spent $40,000, hired the best specialists, used the best technology, and it didn't work." He paused, emotion roughening his voice. Then a mechanic with a bum leg looked at her wheelchair for 30 seconds and saw what million-dollar engineers had missed. He saw my daughter. Not a case study, not a specification sheet. My daughter. Hawk's hand swept across the crowd. Today, 516 veterans have been helped by Cole's methods. 16 cities now run operations based on what he built. The VA has changed its procurement protocols. And my daughter is going to college to become the engineer who listens instead of the one who talks. Applause rippled through the crowd. Not polite, genuine. But this isn't about Cole. It's about all of us. About what happens when we stop accepting failure. When we stop believing the system is too big to change. When we decide that people matter more than bureaucracy. He gestured to Sloan. My daughter wants to say something. Sloan walked to the stage. No wheelchair, just her forearm crutches that had become extensions of herself. She moved with confidence that had been unimaginable a year ago. She stood at the podium. 17 now, high school graduation behind her, college starting in 2 weeks, a future that had been invisible 12 months earlier. 1 year ago, I was broken, she said. Her voice carried across the park without needing amplification. Strong, clear, determined. Not my spine, my hope. I thought the pain was my fault, that my body was defective, that I was the problem everyone was too polite to mention. She paused, letting the words settle. Cole didn't fix my wheelchair first. He fixed my belief that I deserved to suffer. He saw me when everyone else saw a disability. He listened when everyone else talked. He cared when caring wasn't profitable or convenient or easy. Sloan's hand gripped the podium. Today I stand here, literally stand, because one mechanic refused to accept that expensive meant right, that credentials guaranteed competence, that my suffering was inevitable. She looked directly at Cole, who was trying to disappear into the crowd. Uncomfortable with attention, as always. You taught me that broken things can be fixed if someone cares enough to really look. That the most important skill isn't technical knowledge. It's compassion. It's willingness to see suffering and refuse to look away. Her voice strengthened. I start biomedical engineering school in 2 weeks. I'm going to design equipment that puts users first, that listens instead of dictates, that treats people like people instead of problems to solve. Tears streamed down her face now, but her smile was radiant. And every single day, I'm going to remember the mechanic who saw me, who believed me, who fixed what everyone else said was unfixable. The crowd erupted. Standing ovation, 500 people acknowledging what had been built from one moment of courage, one decision to speak truth to power, one mechanic who couldn't look away from suffering. Cole stood in the back, overwhelmed, uncomfortable, grateful. Dean rolled up beside him. She's right, about all of it. I just fix things, Cole said quietly. It's what I do. No, Dean said. You see people, it's who you are. Hawk called Cole to the stage. He tried to refuse, but the crowd wouldn't let him. They chanted his name until he had no choice but to walk forward. He stood at the podium, 500 faces watching, expecting words of wisdom, inspiring speeches, something profound. Cole had never been good with words, so he spoke the only truth he knew. I'm not a hero. I'm a mechanic with a bum leg and a garage that was about to fail. Everything good that happened in the last year happened because a 16-year-old girl was brave enough to hope, because a father loved his daughter enough to take a chance, because brothers decided to take care of their own. He gestured to the crowd. You want to know the secret? There isn't one. Just listen. Really listen. When someone says they hurt, believe them. When the system fails, build something better. When you see suffering, refuse to accept it as inevitable. Cole's voice got rougher. In the Army, they taught me that mechanics keep soldiers alive. Every bolt you tighten, every system you check, that's someone's kid coming home. I thought that ended when I got discharged. But it didn't. It just changed form. He looked at the wall-sized banner displaying photos of the 516 veterans helped. These men and women served. They sacrificed. They came home to a system that failed them. Someone had to fix that. Turned out I could, so I did. Simple words, but they carried weight, truth, the kind of honesty that cuts through complexity and finds bedrock. We can all be healers. We just have to care enough to troop on. The crowd rose again, not because the speech was eloquent, because it was real. After the ceremony, after the crowd had dispersed and the sun had started setting over the Arizona desert, a smaller group remained. The core family, the ones who'd been there from the beginning or close to it, Cole and Sloan, Hawk and Wrench, Dean and Carter, Hammer and Blaze. A dozen others who'd become essential pieces of something bigger than any of them. They sat in a circle on the grass, watching the last light fade from the sky. The comfortable silence of people who'd been through fire together and emerged stronger. What happens now? Sloan asked. Not with worry, with curiosity. We keep going, Hawk said. 16 cities becomes 30, 30 becomes 50. We keep building until no veteran has to suffer because the system failed them. The VA changes are real, Blaze added. New protocols going into effect next month. End-user testing mandatory. Veterans consulted during design. We changed the system from outside, made them better. Cole listened but didn't speak. He was thinking about Daniel, the 8-year-old with cerebral palsy who could now play with his friends. About Dean, whose shoulders didn't scream anymore. About Carter, who could stand without agony. About Sloan, who'd asked for help when asking felt impossible. Who'd trusted a stranger with her suffering. I spent 3 years thinking I was useless, Cole said finally. Failed marriage, failed business, broken body. I thought surviving the war was the best thing I'd ever do, that everything after was just waiting to die. He looked around the circle, at faces that had become family. Then Sloan showed up, and I learned something. Surviving isn't the achievement. What you do after surviving, that's what matters. How you use the skills you earned, the pain you endured, the second chance you were given. Hawk nodded. You taught me that too. I thought being a good father meant buying the best, paying for expertise, trusting credentials. You showed me it meant listening, really listening, seeing her instead of the disability, believing her when she said it hurt. We're all broken in some way, Wrench added, his gravelly voice carrying wisdom earned through decades of living. The question isn't whether we're damaged, it's whether we're willing to help each other heal. The stars came out, Arizona stars that shine brighter than anywhere else because the desert has no mercy but offers perfect clarity. And sitting in that circle, Cole understood what he'd really been given. Not just a mission, not just purpose, but family, brotherhood, belonging. The things he'd thought he lost when he left the Army. The things he'd thought were gone forever. They'd been waiting, he just had to be broken enough to find them. 2 years after that dawn, when 95 bikers surrounded his garage, Cole's operation had expanded beyond anything he'd imagined. 32 cities now, 87 trained mechanics, 1,243 veterans helped. The VA's new protocols had reduced equipment complaints by 78%. Satisfaction ratings had climbed. The system was slowly, painfully learning to listen. Sloan was in her second year at ASU, top of her biomedical engineering class, already had internship offers from 3 major medical device companies. All of them wanted the student who understood that the best design came from listening to users, not impressing peers. She still worked at the garage on weekends, still walked with her forearm crutches, still gave hope just by existing. Dean had become the national coordinator, overseeing all 32 locations, training new mechanics, ensuring Cole's methods were replicated faithfully. Hawk had stepped back from day-to-day operations, but he remained the heart, the enforcer, the one who made sure nobody forgot why they were doing this. And Cole still worked in his original garage, the humble place where it all started. He could have moved to something bigger, newer, cleaner. But this garage had history, had meaning, was home. He was training his 4th class of mechanics, teaching them not just the technical skills, but the mindset, how to listen, how to see, how to care when caring wasn't convenient. 5 years after Sloan first appeared in her torture device, Cole stood in his garage on a quiet Sunday morning. The walls were covered with photos now, not hundreds, thousands, each one representing a life changed, a person helped, a moment when someone chose compassion over indifference. Sloan visited. She'd graduated from ASU with honors, had job offers from every major medical device manufacturer, had chosen to start her own company instead. "I'm going to design assistive technology the right way," she told Cole. "User-centered from day one. Veterans and disabled people consulted during every phase. Equipment that helps instead of hurts." Her company was already successful, already changing the industry, already proving that caring about people could be profitable. She walked into the garage without crutches now. Her spine had healed enough over 5 years that she only needed them occasionally. Another miracle nobody had predicted. "You know what I remember most?" she asked, standing beside Cole while he worked on a wheelchair. "Not the pain, not the suffering, not even the relief when you fixed my chair." "What then?" "The moment you saw me, really saw me. When you looked at my face instead of my disability. When you believed me instead of the experts. That moment changed everything." Cole nodded, understanding. "You taught me that broken things can be fixed if someone cares enough to try, that the system can change if enough people refuse to accept failure, that one person with skill and heart can save lives." 10 years after 95 bikers surrounded his garage, Cole was 60 years old. His hair had gone gray. His limp was worse. His hands showed arthritis from decades of mechanical work. But he'd never been happier. The operation had gone international. Canada, UK, Australia, anywhere veterans were being failed mechanics trained in Cole's methods were building something better. Over 10,000 people helped, countless more affected through the system changes forced by persistent compassion. Sloan's company was now the 3rd largest assistive technology manufacturer in America. Every product went through extensive user testing. Every design included input from the people who'd actually use it. She'd become the engineer who listened, just like she'd promised. 15 years after that transformative dawn, Cole Bennett sat on his porch. His garage was still running, still helping veterans, now run by mechanics he'd trained who were training others. The cycle continuing. He'd officially retired 6 months earlier, his body finally demanding rest after decades of hard use. But he still consulted, still advised, still showed up when someone needed him. Dean visited regularly, still in his perfectly tracking wheelchair. Now 67, grandchildren who called Cole Uncle Cole, even though they shared no blood. Hawk visited too, older now, retired from the club, spending time with Sloan's children, his grandchildren, the legacy that had almost been stolen by inadequate equipment and institutional indifference. They sat on Cole's porch on a Saturday evening, 3 men who'd found each other through crisis, who'd built something that outlasted them. 17,000 people, Hawk said, reading from his phone. The network Blaze had built still tracked every person helped. 17,000 veterans given their lives back. And the VA protocols stuck, Dean added. New administration tried to roll them back. Veteran groups fought, won. User-centered design is now mandated by law. Cole listened, satisfied, not proud exactly, just content. He'd done what he set out to do, fixed what was broken, listened when others talked, cared when caring cost him everything. You know what's funny, Cole said. 15 years ago, I thought my life was over. Failed marriage, failed business, broken body. I'd survived Afghanistan but couldn't survive civilian life. He gestured to his modest house, to the garage visible down the street, to the life he'd built from rubble. Then a 16-year-old girl asked for help, and everything changed. You changed everything, Hawk corrected. Sloan asked. You answered. That's the difference. We all answered, Cole said. You, Dean, Wrench, Carter. All of you. That's what made it work. One person can see a problem. It takes a community to fix it. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set over the desert. Three men who'd learned that redemption doesn't come from grand gestures. It comes from showing up, from caring, from refusing to accept that suffering is inevitable, from fixing what's broken one bolt at a time. The final scene came on a Tuesday morning. Cole was 83 years old now, still sharp in mind, if not in body, still living in the house the Brotherhood had helped him buy 33 years earlier. The garage was legendary now, a museum almost, the place where everything started, where one mechanic refused to stay silent, where compassion beat bureaucracy through sheer persistence. Young mechanics made pilgrimages there, to see the original workbench, to touch the tools Cole had used, to stand where the movement began. Sloan visited. She was 49 now, gray threading through her auburn hair, CEO of the second largest assistive technology company in the world. Mother of three, grandmother of one. She walked without assistance. Decades of proper spinal alignment had allowed healing nobody thought possible. She carried her forearm crutches in her car, not because she needed them, because they reminded her where she'd been, what she'd overcome, who'd believed in her when believing seemed foolish. They sat in Cole's living room, surrounded by photos spanning 3 decades, 17,000 faces, 17,000 stories, 17,000 moments when someone decided to care. They want to name a VA hospital wing after you, Sloan said, the Cole Bennett Center for Adaptive Technology. Cole shook his head. I don't need buildings named after me. It's not for you, it's to remind people, to make sure nobody forgets that the system changed because one person refused to accept failure. Cole thought about that, about the young mechanic who'd stood in his garage 33 years ago, terrified, exhausted, gambling everything on being right, about Sloan suffering in silence, writing secret notes asking for help, about Hawk's desperation to save his daughter, about Dean's destroyed shoulders, about Carter's chronic pain, about thousands of others who'd been failed by institutions that forgot they existed. All right, he said finally, but only if Dean's name is on it too, and Hawk's, and Wrench's. This was never about one person. It was about people who cared when caring wasn't required. Sloan smiled. They already agreed to that. Cole looked out his window, at the desert stretching to the horizon, at the life he'd built from pieces everyone else had discarded. You know what I think about most? He asked. Not the thousands we helped, not the system we changed, not even the buildings named after us. What then? That moment in my garage, when you looked at me with those ancient eyes, when you asked if I really thought I could make it better, when you gave me permission to try. His voice roughed with emotion. I was so broken then, so lost, so certain my best days were behind me, and you gave me a reason to matter, a mission, a purpose. Sloan took his weathered hand in hers. You saved my life, Cole. You know that, right? Not just by fixing my wheelchair, by seeing me, by believing me, by refusing to accept that my suffering was inevitable. You saved mine first. They sat together in the quiet afternoon, father and daughter in all the ways that mattered, bound not by blood, but by the moment when one asked for help and the other refused to look away. The sun moved across the sky. The desert held its breath. And somewhere in Phoenix, in a garage that had become sacred ground, another mechanic was helping another veteran, continuing the cycle, honoring the legacy, because that's what they did now. That's who they were. People who fixed what was broken, who listened when others talked, who cared when institutions didn't. Mechanics who kept soldiers alive, one adjustment at a time, one person at a time, one moment of compassion at a time. And in that continuity, in that refusal to accept failure as final, Cole Bennett had found the thing he'd been searching for since the day an IED shattered his leg outside Kandahar. He'd found peace, not from forgetting the suffering, from transforming it, from taking every ounce of pain and turning it into purpose, every moment of doubt into determination, every failure into fuel. He'd learned what the Army tried to teach him, what took 33 years and 17,000 veterans to truly understand. Mechanics keep soldiers alive. Every bolt you tighten, every system you check, every person you refuse to give up on. That's how you honor the dead. That's how you serve the living. That's how you turn surviving into something that matters. Cole closed his eyes, Sloane's hand still in his, the afternoon sun warm on his face. And for the first time in his long, complicated, beautiful life, Cole Bennett felt complete. The mechanic who'd learned to heal. The soldier who'd found his mission. The broken man who'd discovered that the cracks were where the light got in. He'd started with one wheelchair, one suffering girl, one moment of courage in a failing garage, and he'd changed the world. Not through grand gestures or brilliant innovation or institutional power, through the simple, radical act of giving a damn when nobody else would, through seeing people instead of problems, through listening instead of talking, through believing that broken things could be fixed if someone cared enough to really try. That was his legacy, not the buildings or the numbers or the system changes, but the 17,000 people who learned that their suffering mattered, that someone saw them, that they deserved better than what bureaucracy provided. And somewhere in that transformation, Cole Bennett had learned it too, that he mattered, that his skills had value, that surviving was just the beginning, that the real measure of a life was what you did with the second chance you were given. He'd done something with his, something that would outlast him, something that would ripple forward through generations of mechanics who learned to care and veterans who learned to hope. Not bad for a mechanic with a bum leg in a garage that was about to fail. Not bad at all. The sun set over the Arizona desert, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple and impossible beauty. And in his living room, surrounded by 3 decades of proof that compassion could change the world, Cole Bennett smiled. He'd kept his promise. All of them.